By now you have heard the story of Kilmar Garcia. Here are the facts. Mr. Garcia came into the United States illegally. He was detained by the government. Two separate immigration judges determined that he had credible ties to MS-13, the violent gang from Central America, and they ordered him deported. After being ordered deported, Mr. Garcia said, wait, amnesty. I need amnesty. It could go badly for me if I go home. And so his deportation was stayed pending consideration of his amnesty request. He's been here so long, he got married to an American citizen and has a child, the child of which is an American citizen. When Donald Trump came into office, they rounded up Mr. Garcia. A federal judge told the Trump administration they were not allowed to deport Mr. Garcia pending the resolution of his amnesty case, and they put him on a plane and sent him to El Salvador. They did not notify the flight of the order enjoining the deportation until it was too late. The plane was already over Mexico, and they went to court and said, oops, our bad. It was an administrative error. The case was appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court cannot order the President of the United States to go get someone and bring them to the United States because the Supreme Court doesn't have that power. That's an executive power. What they did is they told the lower court to instruct the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia. Why? Because, again, there's a court order not to allow him to be deported until the resolution of his case. Now, here is the objective fact. If Mr. Garcia is returned to the United States, he will be deported again because the Trump administration has pulled back the asylum claims that would allow someone like Mr. Garcia to stay in the country. So you bring him back from El Salvador, he's going to be deported. To where? El Salvador. He's already there. The Trump administration cannot be made by a court to bring someone out of a foreign land who is not a U.S. citizen back to this country. You simply cannot make a president bring someone into the United States who is not an American citizen. The rules are different between an American citizen and a non-citizen. And even with a citizen, a court would struggle to force a president to use executive power to comply with a judicial order. Those are the facts. You can dispute the facts, but you would be wrong. Those are the facts. What people on the right say is that he's going to be deported anyway, so leave him there. What people on the left say is that you've got to honor the court's order and bring him back to have due process. And two, if he's going to be deported, he would not be deported to a prison facility. He'd be just deported to his homeland. And so what's happening to Mr. Garcia is cruel and unusual, a violation of the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment applies not just to American citizens, but to others who are here by putting him in a facility in El Salvador that he does not belong in because he has not been accused of a crime other than illegal immigration. And he has not been found guilty of a crime. He should not be in a facility. At worst, he should be in El Salvador, but not in the facility. And that this is a constitutional crisis, and the president is defying the law. President Bukele was at the White House yesterday. This is the interaction.
Can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to have suggested that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you can release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world. No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
Now, that's Bukele saying we can't, and he views the guy as a terrorist, as someone, do not forget now, he was credibly found to be tied to MS-13. Now, his current defense lawyers say, don't believe all that, but a federal immigration judge found there was credible evidence to tie him to that. And now what people will say on the left is, well, actually, the guys who said that recanted later. At the time, they said as much, and the judge found the body of evidence compelled him to say the guy was credibly tied to MS-13. This is Jeffrey Tuggentubin on CNN.
A few days ago that he wasn't.
Can I just ask, you both seem to agree the Supreme Court may have been more deliberate in its language than a lot of people are, analyzing here. What do you think the Supreme Court thinks about all this? What do you think the Chief Justice thinks when he sees this man not being returned?
I think they're very, very cautious, and they don't want a confrontation with the president. That's why the language is so cautious. But I think they want him returned.
Well, but I also think they do not want an international confrontation that they cause, and they will be very deferential. If El Salvador says we are simply not turning him over, I bet this Supreme Court will say, well, there's nothing that can be done in that case.
You don't think this man is coming back?
I don't think he's coming back, basically,
I'm still
ever.
hopeful.
The lady's still hopeful. Tubin says he's not coming back. Listen, he's from El Salvador. He's a citizen of El Salvador. He's an illegal immigrant in this country. The right, the Trump supporters say, I will tell you, there are some vocal Trump supporters who say this is not good. You're setting a precedent that the Democrats will use. Now, I have a hard time believing Democrats will deport anybody, but you should understand there is there is real concern, even among some Trump supporters, that this is a line that should not be crossed because it will be used eventually by the Democrats in a way we can't foresee. There is a concern about respecting due process of law. There is a concern about telling courts we can't do anything. You put people in limbo. And, and the left is amping up this fear about they could deport Americans. They could deport Americans. Here is one of CNN's legal analysts on this issue.
I mean, I think it's worth reminding folks, one of the complaints that we had in the Declaration of Independence at the beginning of the American Revolution was that King George was sending criminals to faraway prisons. It's almost like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. There's no legal authority to send a U.S. citizen to serve a U.S. criminal sentence in a foreign prison. And, Kate, it would be pretty striking if there was, because that would mean any of us could be effectively disappeared into a prison with no U.S. legal constraints, with no potential human rights limits, no matter what. And that's a pretty scary proposition just arising out of this one immigration case.
But see, I don't think it arises. I think the Trump administration is toying with the media on this. I'm trying to play it straight with you. And just give you, here's what the Trump supporters think, here's what the Trump supporters don't think. I will give you my plain opinion here. I think it is a dangerous game for the Trump administration to deport someone claiming it's an administrative error and ostensibly make no effort to bring him back. I do think it's a dangerous game. Concurrent to that, I have a hard time being sympathetic to a man that was found to have credible ties to MS-13, who's not an American citizen, who could have left as Trump was coming in, chose not to, and found himself in this situation. No, I do not think he should be in a detention facility in El Salvador. I don't think he should be, just given the facts on the ground. He was not found guilty of any crime. Yes, he came into the country illegally, but we tend not to round up people and put them in detention facilities for God knows how long in that situation. But he's going to be deported again, so let him stay. Release him from the detention facility, but he's not coming back to the United States. The courts are having a hard time here because they don't have the power really to do anything. But here's where I think this heads. Whether you think this is an assault on the Constitution, an abridgment of freedoms, or what, here's where I think this is going to go. And this ties into this angle that the left is now seeing that if he can do this to an illegal immigrant from El Salvador, sending him back to El Salvador, he can do this to an American citizen. I think that's kind of preposterous. And here's what I think is going to happen. I think federal judges are going to permanently bar the deportation of illegal aliens to detention facilities abroad. given that once this happened and there was an administrative error and now Trump says, we can't bring the guy home, I think there's going to be a permanent injunction. I also think that if the Trump administration were to attempt to move Americans abroad into detention facilities abroad, I think the courts would say, no, you can't do that. Now, here's where some of you will say, well, what if they do it anyway? What if they do it anyway? Y'all all know about qualified immunity, and qualified immunity is that administrative law enforcement actors have immunity from the actions they take and official conduct, and they cannot be personally liable for behavior unless the behavior they're doing is a behavior that the courts have previously said you can't do. So one of the quirks of qualified immunity is when a novel case comes before the court and they say, oh, this fact pattern has never happened before, you can't sue this officer individually because we've never encountered this before, but from here on out, if this happens again, they can be personally liable. You issue an injunction immediately and say no American can be deported or no illegal alien can be deported to a foreign country without first court review. From here on out, any federal official who participates, down to the local law enforcement officer who does it, they can be civilly liable. That's not something the president can pardon. They're not criminally liable. They're civilly liable. So what you will see are a massive pile of lawsuits against law enforcement officers personally, not just officially, not just professionally, but in their personal capacity as someone who's doing something that the court has said you can't do. Do you really think there are donors with deep enough pockets around the country to cover all of those lawsuits? This will effectively stymie what the Trump administration wants to do. And that ultimately is why I think Kilmar Garcia needs to be brought back to this country. Because I think ultimately what happens here is the Trump administration undermines themselves. Now, a buddy of mine says, no, what's going to happen is Trump's going to enter into a treaty with these countries. But a treaty requires 2/3 of Senate approval. You're not going to get 2/3 Senate approval. And an executive agreement doesn't get you that far because an executive agreement isn't approved by Congress. It's just one branch of government. So I think what you're going to see if he doesn't bring Garcia back is a move by courts to permanently enjoin deportations. Oh, wait, that's happened today. A federal judge in Boston has ruled that the Trump administration cannot revoke the legal status of over 500,000 migrants who flew into the U.S. under President Biden's mass parole program. The Biden administration created the program. This is from Bill Malugin, he says, out of thin air using his executive parole authority. It was temporarily halted due to fraud in the program, and a judge is now blocking Trump from using his own authority to cancel the humanitarian parole grants that Joe Biden created with his authority. Now, this prevents the deportation of people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. The judge is an Obama appointee and is premised on legal error and lacking individualized assessment. And guess what? The fact that the Trump administration made an administrative error, in its own words, moving Mr. Garcia to El Salvador, weighed on the judge's mind, preventing the rollback of this program. This is what happens. We're in a tit for tat between the judiciary and the presidency, and the civil penalties of qualified immunity are going to start kicking in to discourage any law enforcement officer from complying with deportation orders. That's where this heads, unless the president's team does make efforts to bring Garcia back and then deport him right back to El Salvador. It's all smoke and mirrors and fighting courts, but there are real legal consequences here, which is why I think the administration at least needs to go through the theater of humoring the judge and then send Mr. Garcia back to El Salvador, just not to the detention facility.